The inevitability of climate change unless we do something, and the impact it'll have upon the climate that we're currently experiencing. And then David's projections of what the options might be or what the implications might be for what we can do. I suppose just reflect upon the scale of the event. When we're talking about significant events, and this is the Gel River fire putting a plume over Hobart, you can see clearly that individually we have very little impact upon this sort of scale of event. And David's quite right. Pyrocumulus fires that we've seen was the first one I saw in 2003 as I watched it climb out of the Snowy River along the the New South Wales Victorian border heading towards Eden. We felt, sitting in Melbourne, predicting that, looking at the Bureau Met radar, seeing it establish and the lightning strikes come out of that as it moved along the border, thinking, oh well, there goes southeast New South Wales and East Gippsland. Luckily it fell into country that had only been burnt the year before, a very significant prescribed burn being done by New South Wales Parks and New South Wales Forests, and it didn't proceed. And to be honest, we're sitting in Melbourne in 2003 thinking, well, that's the end of the southeast, that's the end of East Gippsland, because once it gets into there, it'll do what it did this year in 2020. And we've been waiting for that to happen ever since, to be honest, for the 17 years. Just remind you about the model that I gave up before, about the yellow boundaries of the extent of bushfire and the ember attack, etc. The penetration of those events into the city itself, and this is just one model with two known ignition points on a known environmental conditions, the weather on that particular day. These fires could start anywhere and they could impact upon the city in various ways. So it's not a message for the individual person who might live in Sandy Bay, it's a message for everybody and the impact of it. The modelling we've done now looks at what land managers like the City of Hobart, like the Park Service, Sustainable Timbers Tasmania, in terms of what we can do in terms of landscape treatment using prescribed burning. The chart you have there, the dark line at the top, this is modelled on works that have been done up until, I think, May last year, would show that if we did nothing, our risk would continue to climb and we remain quite high in the human settlement area that's represented by Hobart. If we did nothing, our risk would continue to remain quite high, the risk of bushfire. If we did some work like prescribed burning in broad landscape areas, we significantly reduce the risk of a high intensity fire. And the beauty of that is, or the logic in that, the theory at least, is that if you break the fuel up, the opportunity you have for that fire to encounter a low fuel state and for the fire behaviour to moderate at a particular time during the day. Middle of the afternoon is not a particularly good day for that to happen, time for that to happen, but if it meets that fuel reduced area at 10 o'clock at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, 4:30 in the morning, then you actually have a chance to actually directly attack that fire or put a suppression methodology in there that will prevent it from continuing its modelled run into the assets you're trying to protect. And if we do near asset protection, and that's the lower line there, if we do prescribe burning close to the assets around the city in that peri-urban area, and that's a lot of the work that the city does, small burns in blocks and reserves around the settled area of the city, then you reduce the risk even further. And essentially that strategic application of fuel reduction has the opportunity to provide strategic advantage to first response and suppression efforts, but it also moderates the fire behaviour during in a significant event. The caveat about that is, and we've learnt that in 2020, is none of this makes any difference on a day when the fire danger is in the catastrophic realm at the end of it, because the fire then, a fire and those sort of things, as David's explained, is operating in the canopy. It's not the understory, it's not the near surface fuel of the leaf litter that we've removed. The fire is actually passing over the landscape in the canopy of the trees, in the canopy of the upper story of that vegetation, and therefore your ability to suppress it, your ability, unless you remove the trees altogether and concrete the joint, you're not really going to have an impact upon a fire in a catastrophic day. The work that we're doing, in a landscape sense, is about those moderate days, and that will make a difference on those days. But all bets are off when you come across that most horrific day. This is some other modelling we've done, which looks at impact upon particular suburbs or areas. And as you can see, Lenna Valley there is in that lighter blue colour, which indicates that the work that we've done in that, at a landscape sense at least, is making an impact upon the residual risk. If we'd done nothing, the risk might have been significant or whatever it might be. The work that we've done for areas like Tolman's Hill, Mount Nelson, etc., and importantly for Lenna Valley, is we've reduced the residual risk by 25 to 50%. We've actually made a difference of the likely or modelled impact of bushfires upon the suburbs here by 25 to 50% by the work that we've done. It doesn't refer to the near surface, the asset protection zone around your individual property, nor does it refer to the construction type or the work that you may have done to meet the Australian Standard 3959 in terms of building in a bushfire-prone area. What we're saying is that we're actually making a difference by doing these burns, because strategically and through the model we can demonstrate that we're having an impact upon potential rate of spread of these fires through the landscape. There's a whole lot of challenges with doing that. Obviously, areas, if you live in Ferntree, and that's the green areas down the bottom, I've got some bad news for you. We're not actually having much impact upon your property if you live in Ferntree, because of the proximity of those elevated fuels, those wet eucalypt forests, which I've already told you are untreatable. Nothing we do in this landscape will make a difference. So we reduce the risk in Ferntree and Nika and Strickland Avenue and Summerlees Road by 5%. Not particularly good message to tell people in Ferntree, but as David said, most, if not all, people up there understand that risk, and they've made a decision to live there, and they have a different strategy about how they'll deal with that risk. The risk treatment elements that we do, that we're trying to use to reduce bushfire risk to the community in Tassie, in Hobart, is improve defendable space around assets. We're removing fuel close to the asset. And when I mean the asset, I mean critical community infrastructure like Tas water networks, electricity substations, power lines, etc., and importantly dwellings, houses, because that's where people that's where you'll lose your life if you're confronted by a fast-moving bushfire. So the work we've done is specifically addressing that risk. We established fuel breaks to improve survivability of those assets and, importantly, the residents. The work we do in removing fuel close to assets and roads, etc., may give people extra minutes to leave. An experience we've had in previous fires, and as recent as 2009 and even recently on the North Coast in New South Wales and in Victoria, is that people will stay to the last minute. They will forever regret doing that, and there's some excellent documentaries on the ABC that will show you those interviews. People tend to wait for the fire to come over the back fence or the back hill before they decide to make a decision to leave. And I've got to tell you, in 2009, 50% of the people made that decision, and 50% of the deaths in that event were attributable to people making a decision too late to leave. They either decided they were going to leave and that was their bushfire survival plan, but they left it too late to actually activate it and leave, or they decided to stay and defend, then realised this is a really bad call, I can't do this, I'm now going to leave. And in doing so made the decision to try and escape through a fire which had already progressed across their escape routes. We reduce the fire behaviour in landscape through prescribed burns, as I've said. We treat difficult areas using machinery, hideously expensive, but if we can't burn it, we've got to reduce that fuel of the near surface and elevated fuel using treating it using machinery. We also do work to ensure escape route integrity, so removing trees, removing understory vegetation, and making sure that where a community only has one escape route, that we've checked it and we've done our work to make sure that trees which may block that road during an escape attempt, that those trees have been removed. My message is, don't be there when the trees on the side of the road are burning. That's way too late. I'm not going to be able to protect you from that. You need to be out of that community well before the fire impacts upon you or your escape route. We recognise human behaviour in a crisis, and we try and improve the situational awareness of risk, and that's what this is really all about, and the work we do with citizens around the city, with the TFS and ourselves. We also try and improve detection and fire and effectiveness and speed of the TFS first attack by those 112 kilometres of fire trail that we build to a standard, so that firefighters can get into the bush and deal with spot fires or lightning strikes quickly and keep them small. That's the only real successful tactic you can to prevent fires from getting large. Overlaid with that is we're trying to maintain the biodiversity and the landscape character of the city, because we've been told by our community that's critical to the reason that Hobart is so attractive and why so many people have moved here. It's not Melbourne, it's not Adelaide, it has a character. The landscape that's here is part of the city and part of the reason that people are here. So it's not fair to, it's not accurate to say that every house in a bushfire will burn. You can do stuff around your house, around your property, around your asset to improve its survivability. I can't guarantee that, but we can do stuff, and we know very well what those things are. And they're driven by what we call the bushfire attack level, which is the Australian Standard 3959, which looks at what a level of construction standard you'll need to undertake in a new house to withstand the expected bushfire attack that you'll experience in the location that you're building your house. It relies on slope, aspect, vegetation, and obviously the opportunity to place that house in the landscape in relation to those issues. So when it's got a very low BAL level, your risk is low, radiant heat on the building is insignificant, you don't have a great deal of vegetation, and you don't really need to do a great deal to protect your house. However, ember attack may still impact you, and I've shown you how that would be the case. So even though you've got a bushfire attack level of low, the lowest you can get, you still need to address ember attack. As you go through that 12.5, BAL 19, and it's essentially what it's trying to do is define a kilowatt per square metre for the survivability of the building, up to BAL 29, which is the common number that we use in doing our treatment and our reserves for adjacent properties. The risk is considered to be high. It's increasing levels of ember attack and burning debris ignited by wind-borne embers, and increasing likelihood of exposure to radiant heat because of the proximity of heavy fuels and the landscape location of the house. BAL 40 and BAL flame zone, even though they're on the list, are not applied in Tasmania. The fire service, the chief officer, has instructed assessors that it is not to be used as a means for justifying building a house in a particular location, because the engineering solutions for that are unproven. And therefore BAL 29 is the highest standards, which means you need to build your house some distance from the vegetation. Otherwise you're exposing yourself to an unacceptable level of risk. And you can see in those two photos on either side that you can protect a house in a pretty strong landscape, eucalypt landscape. The one on the bottom right is actually in Adelaide, not far from a property that I used to own. And I know through the local brigade that One Tree Hill Brigade, etc., we were absolutely, I suppose, adamant to tell people that we only had 2 trucks in the shed, and if you thought we were coming to protect your house when a bushfire went through the Adelaide Hills, we had some very bad news for you. It was not going to happen. So if you wanted your house to survive, you needed to take the effort to protect it from bushfire. It was not going to be a position where you ring 000 and magically a fire service appliance would turn up, because that is just not possible with a number of properties. And you can see, and I know that a number of people took that very seriously, and we were quite effective in that, and therefore houses survived. Not all of them, but a significant number of them. Now, what did they do to achieve that? there are different levels of expenditure and different levels of effort you can take to protect or improve the survivability of your house. And simple things like can be quite low cost. They can be DIY, you can do it yourself. You don't have to engage a consultant or a bushfire specialist, and there's any number of guides on how to do this. The best one, and we'll send to everyone who's present tonight an email with the links to the references that we've spoken about tonight. One of them is the CFA retrofitting houses to protect from bushfires. It's an excellent document, and really it talks about the things that you can do quite cheaply and can do yourself. You can seal the small gaps around your house. If you've got a wooden deck, that deck is a source of ignition, as you can see there on that on the deck, the treated pine deck there. An ember landing on that under the right conditions can actually ignite and start to a fire to impact upon your house. Radiant heat, direct flame impingement come from the structure itself, created by the ember that's borne by the fire behaviour. In terms of your gutters, the ability to keep fire out of the roof space is absolutely critical. There are simple things you can do that in terms of sarking underneath the gutters and gutter guard on those sort of things. And looking at the surround of the house in terms of fuel that's close proximity to the external features of the house that will prevent that material from catching alight and then catching onto the house and burning. You can see there that a downpipe in a garden bed around the house that had significant amount of mulch in it can lead into the boards on the house and the open space under the property, catching alight, and therefore the house goes up. You can fix that by enclosing the space. You can fix that by using non-flammable materials for your mulch around the immediate surround of the house. Not hideously expensive. Part of your gardening program, part of your house maintenance, you can do that quite easily. Weather strips, draft excluders, protecting windows from breaking by using screens, sealing vents, making sure that you've got screens or mesh over vents so that they don't penetrate into your property. Simple, easy things. They are a low-cost option. If you want to get a bit more serious about it, there are moderate cost options. You can install a very simple sprinkler system in a property that's underneath the eaves of the veranda or around the side of the house that actually sprays water at a low volume that will prevent embers from directly impacting upon your house. Really useful, not that hard to do. You can run it off a tank or a pump system, and you can set it and let it do its work if you choose to leave the property. You can put stainless steel or steel mesh over your gutters or any open roof joins in the roof space to ensure that embers don't penetrate into the roof itself. A lot of houses are lost as the house roof catches alight, and this is very common in the US, but they don't build out of galvanised iron or tiles. They've got these weird thing for using bitumen-based sarking, and then they put essentially split timber shingles across the roof, and then they wonder why they burn down so effectively. And as an Australian firefighter, and you walk through their properties and you go, I can't believe you guys are doing this. But it's a traditional method of building particularly in the Pacific Northwest, where that's just the way it's done, John. That's how we build our houses here. We've always done it. And it's really interesting to see that they're now starting to realise that that's just an unsustainable lifestyle choice, that they need to make a difference about how to do that. And these are moderate cost options. You can remove flammable timber and use non-flammable species, and there's a list of that in the Australian Standard. You can separate external structures within 6 metres of the house with fire-resistant walls. You can use non-flammable material for the garden structures or the sheds, etc. And you can protect your house from direct flame impingement, from radiant heat, and from ember attack with some reasonably costs. And when I'm saying reasonably costs, it's in the $10,000 to $20,000 mark to do those sort of things. If you want to get really serious, and this is really, it's a high cost and it's best done at a construction level, not necessarily for retrofitting, but it's about the whole design of the house, ensuring that there are no open space for embers to penetrate, ensuring that any external structures are made from non-flammable material or less flammable timber, about windows being 5mm thick or double glazed, etc. Those sort of things are significant costs to retrofit to an existing property, but they are fundamental standards within the fundamental provisions within the Australian standard that you can look at, and there might be something that you decide that, I'm going to replace that, or I'm going to retrofit, or I'm going to refurbish the property, and these are things that you can do. Simply putting sarking under the roof space and the walls and the open spaces is a simple way of preventing embers entering the property. If you're doing renovations and things like that, it's almost a no-brainer to do that sort of thing very quickly. And as David said, installing a bushfire shelter, that's been a problematic issue across Australia. Agencies are very reluctant to endorse that. Victoria has gone to the point of allowing people through a development application process to put in place approved bushfire shelters, which is interesting because that was one of the recommendations from Alan Stretton in the 1939 bushfires, that forest workers were provided with bunkers within the forest that they worked. They were harvesting timber to enable them to survive the onslaught of another fire like the 1939 fire. So it really got to the point where we're coming back almost to something that was done many, many years ago. Really, it's not hard, and the document I referred to from this Country Fire Authority in Victoria gives you some guidelines on that, and it's really about preparing your property. And the sequence to do that is essentially a checklist. Walk around the property, be fearless, be honest and have a look at it. Assess your risk source. What is your risk source? Is it direct flame impact by mulch or vegetation or stored materials around the property? Is it radiant heat effect, so therefore you've got material close to the property, within the bushfire attack level 29 perhaps, might be the number you use. How do I deal with those things? Or is it ember attack? Is my property pretty good, pretty clear? It's built out of brick, I've got all the gaps closed, but I'm still exposed to ember attack. And once you've made that assessment of your risk source, you can then look at it in terms of your exposure to that risk and how you might change that. Changing your garden type and the type of material, the flammable material you might have on the property, where you store your materials, where you keep your firewood, for example. Is it against the house? Is there stuff stored under the property in an exposed area? Might be paint tins, or might be all sorts of weird and wonderful things underneath the house, which provide that source of fire which can engage with the house and essentially lose the property. Look at gaps in the building, look at entry points for embers. Those are the things, once you determine what the risk source is, you can make those decisions and those assessments. You consider your options to mitigate the risk. Am I going to change those garden beds? Am I going to remove that stored material? Am I going to block the gaps? Am I going to use sarking underneath the fascia of the property? Am I going to change the materials that I intend to do my extensions with to improve the survivability of the property? You can implement simple actions. You can do that this weekend. You can do this walk around and you can make those decisions. A lot of these are do it yourself. They're not hard to do. You can then decide on the level of investment that you feel that you need to take to improve your safety and the survival of your property. They're not hard things to do. The guides from the Country Fire Authority are really useful to push in that way. It might be that you can spend as much money as you want, really. Some people think it's probably cheaper to go and build another house. Or, in the case of Fern Tree, decide that they can't do this anymore. At their age and their ability to undertake this work annually on their property, even though they love living in Fern Tree, love it to death, lived here for 40 years or whatever it might be, it's time for us to move. It's time for us to sell this property and move to somewhere where this burden, this physical burden, this financial burden of maintaining it safely and to do this work is beyond us, and we're going to move to somewhere where it's not the risk not a risk that we have to wear. And Tom loves telling me that I think the last time we did the shock and awe treatment in Fern Tree, I think 6 houses went up for sale the next week. And it was really interesting. And I've done it with all the bushfire-ready neighbourhoods around around that part of Hobart. And it's really interesting to see a couple come in, an elderly couple come in who live in a really fantastic place. And as I make those statements about, are you really up to the task? Usually the wife gets his elbow in the husband and says, see, I told you that. I've been telling you this for years. And quite often it's the discussion that I have with people that forces that really frank exchange. And then the husband sort of reluctantly, and I'm being sexist by saying it's the husband, but usually it is, who says, okay, I get the message. I can't clear all this vegetation. I can't get up on the roof and do the gutters all the time. You're right. We need to make a decision about moving. And, when we did this now 18 months ago, the housing market in Hobart was fantastic. It's a great place, great time to sell. Sadly, someone else bought the property. Hopefully, the message that they get is similar. So there are things that you can do that will achieve that. People and houses are the critical risk. We really, saving people's lives, and you see it in every briefing, every interview you have with people who have been through a major bushfire event, there's always someone who comes up and says, it was absolutely horrendous. We didn't expect this. This is the worst thing I've ever been through in my life. The community's so devastated by this, but thank God no one died. Now, 2009 and recent events, etc., and 67, you couldn't say that because people did die. And as an incident controller, the greatest fear that I have is in managing an incident, I come to the position where I can't say that either at the end of my shift. Luckily, and I hope through good management and good skills, I've not been exposed to the point where someone has died on a property on a fire that I've been responsible for. But it would be absolutely devastating for me for that to happen on my watch, and I would find that incredibly challenging. So it's really about looking after property and removing the fuel, taking the lessons we've learnt from previous events, preparing your family, undertaking a bushfire survival plan, and we put one of those on each one of your chairs so you can do that. Have a bushfire survival plan, talk it with your family, and guess what? Practice it. See how it goes. And be aware of the risk that the situation that you live in, your family, and your ability to implement that plan. And I'll leave you with one challenge. It's a long weekend this weekend. I think it's show day, but no show on Thursday. That's great. So you've got a bit of time, okay? So sometime this weekend, I challenge you with your family to take 1 hour, okay? Walk around the house with your family, set them a time frame, give them half an hour, give them an hour if you want to, it doesn't make any difference, and pull everything out of the house that means that you cannot live without. Those things that are critically important to you, that if they were lost, if they were burnt in a fire, if the house burnt down, and pile them in the middle of the lounge room. Everyone can bring whatever they want, doesn't matter. And pile it in the middle of the lounge room, and then look at what you're going to have to transport away from your property in the case of a bushfire emergency warning. Are you going to get it all in the car? I'll put money that you won't be able to. It'll be a difficult decision about how you cut it back down again. But before you cut it down into a dimension or a size that can fit into the vehicle that you might be, or you might go and buy a truck, I suppose. That's another option. Before you do that, walk around the rest of the house and say goodbye to the rest of your belongings that you've chosen to leave behind. Because you've gone through a conscious process and said everything that's not in the middle of the lounge room will be gone when this house burns down. It's a pretty confronting process to go through, okay? But what it does is on that day, God forbid, your house burns down and you have those things you've chosen to save, and you're hopefully not at the evacuation centre because that wouldn't be a very pleasant place to be, but if you're at a friend's place or a family member's place, in your own heart, in your own mind, in your own body, you'll say, I saved the things that were important to me, and the things that have gone, I deliberately decided that they could go. Psychologically, in the recovery process, you'll be much better prepared for that event if you've done what I've just asked you to do for 1 hour this weekend. You will have made a decision about what you're going to take. You'll have decided how you're going to save those things, and when you lose the rest, you're at peace with yourself that you've made a conscious decision about that. It's a challenging thing to do. And someone asked me at Mount Nelson, what did I have in the middle of the lounge room? And it was sort of funny. I have one. It's an old Queensland Fire and Rescue Service turnout bag that's full of the things that are important to me, with no reference to my wife about what's important. That's important. That's very significant. It's got the badges of all the organisations that I've worked for in my career, the cloth badges that you wear on your shoulder, and the silver bits from Deputy Chief and Superintendent from Fire Services, etc., because they're irreplaceable. Okay, it's documents, passports, documents to prove who you are, etc., things like that. Some simple mementos of places and things I've been to. Clothes and stuff for 7 days. Nothing worse than going to an evacuation centre and all you're wearing. I've got that. The rest of the pile is taken up by my wife, and the most prominent item on that are 2 cages for the 2 cats. Because at the end of the day, I guarantee she'll give up everything else in that place except for those 2 pets that she adores. She will not drive away from that house, nor will you, and leave your pet inside to die in a fire. The first thing you will throw in the car, if you can catch it, will be whatever pet that you have, whether it be a budgie, whether it be a dog or a cat. And if you've got children, that'll be the thing that they hang on to. That'll be the thing. So when you do that thing this afternoon, I know you will, this weekend, because I've asked you to do it now, think about the cats or the dogs or the budgies or the turtle or the chooks or the ducks or the donkey or whatever it might be that you're going to have to deal with as well, because that will be a fundamental decision you'll need to make on that day when the fire does arrive for you. I'll leave you with that challenge because I think you'll learn more from that than you will of anything that I've told you tonight. You'll learn more about yourself and what's really important to you in your property, and it will trigger you to think about protecting that house from bushfire as it impacts upon the City of Hobart.